Hey everybody, welcome to Geeksvana Live. I hope you're all extremely well today. Today we're going to be talking about obviously a topic which is very much breaking news. First of all, though, I just want to say thank you very much to El Smeged, our senior moderator in the chat, who dropped 5 memberships. So I really appreciate that. Gifted 5 memberships, I should say, is the correct terminology for this platform, isn't it? So thank you very much for that. I hope you're all extremely well. Thank you, Mr. Snowman, for the audio check as well. I appreciate that. Tonight is a first look at the UK CAA public consultation, which is going to impact every single drone flight taken in the open category. So that could be people flying as a recreational, could also be flying commercially in the open category as well. My initial view, having reviewed the document in detail, is that there is a lot of good news. There's perhaps a few bits of expected tough news, but even some of those bits of tough news aren't necessarily as bad as some of us may have feared, which is obviously going to be a good thing. Now, tonight, this show is going to be a general overview. Graham's going to be joining me in just a few moments of the proposed changes laid out as the CAA are, of course, required to do so via public consultation. Over the coming days, we're going to be releasing videos which will deeper dive into aspects of the documents and the changes. But for today, we're going to try and keep it light as possible to give you the overview of what's actually happening and what the key changes are going to be, basically. Then we will deeper dive into why and why not and that kind of thing in later shows as well. So we're going to try and split that stuff up a little bit. We are going to be featuring interactions with the CAA on this proposal, so do let us know your thoughts and questions in the chat and comments. And if you're watching the replay, again, do leave those in the comments below. Leave your comments in the comments. There you go. So yes, Graham's laughing in the background. Thanks, Graham. So yes, so we will be putting your questions to the CAA. We'll be putting the feedback across, etc. And if there's anything that you particularly want to know, and we start to get the commonality of the questions, of course, we're going to raise those as well. Now, there are going to be links in the description. I've noticed that it hasn't refreshed with the updated description yet, but it will do that during the show or just after, with the links to these documents, but also to where you can actually submit your opinion via the public consultation. Now, it's vital that we all get our views heard, in my opinion. We all need to step up and go through the pain of answering this. It isn't as difficult as the CFI to answer. You are answering questions, but it's a lot clearer, and you're answering a specific question rather than, 10 questions bounded together, a bit like how it was on the CFI, basically. So I think that's a good thing. We have a window until the 10th of January to be able to put our views across. So it's a fairly decent sized window, and we've got a lot of time before Christmas to actually be talking about this. And as I say, I'm going to break a lot of this down over the coming days as well, including we are going to do a live broadcast where I'm going to submit my own opinions to each of the questions, which will be a bit of a longer live stream. But that was asked for with the CFI, which we didn't get a chance to do. So hopefully there'll be a part of our audience that'll enjoy that. Otherwise, it will just be me talking to an empty stream, of course. Now, I have to say, they do seem to have listened in the call for input, and some of the areas do seem to have been improved and adapted accordingly. Others, where they've still taken a different view to the majority of the people that responded to the CFI, they've given reasons why they're still following the opposite direction on some of those. Today, we're going to be talking about sub 250 gram drones, C-label drones, the very names of the airspace, and remote ID. That is going to be coming up. So this is an important one. And as I say, I've selected the key parts of the document to discuss, and the rest will obviously happen in the deeper dives and also the topic specific ones. So let's start off by bringing Graham in. Graham, how are you?
Good evening. Hello, everyone. Yeah, and as you know, I'm Mr. Specific Category. So what am I doing here? And really, when I look at this, this is going to have an impact. And I've popped out on Facebook and LinkedIn to say this is going to have an impact on the specific category as well. And that will be right up to OSC based.
Yeah, Graham, what are you doing here?
I don't know.
What are you doing here, Graham? So we
it's going to affect everybody, this one.
It is, exactly, and this is very much a fundamental change in terms of now we are through the Brexit period, now that we are through that period, and this is what we've been hearing from the CAA for a long time in terms of altering and changing and adapting what we're doing in terms of regulation to suit the UK. So there'll be a bit of a mixture of keeping EU things, a bit of a mixture of adapting them to be UK specific and apparently benefit the UK more as well. But as I say, I think some people will be pleasantly surprised. Others will be, at the very least, I think a lot of people will be pleasantly not disappointed, or disappointed to a lower degree, shall we say.
I'm gonna say less blood on the walls than one would expect.
I like that. I like that a lot. So we're going to get straight into the document, and there is, as you would expect, the usual forward from Kevin Woolsey, the co-head of General Aviation and RPAS unit. We're not going to be going into that. We're also not going to be going into the executive summary and parts of the introduction, because we want to bring you what's actually happening in terms of this document and how it's going to be affecting you. And I don't want this show to be 12 hours long. And of course, you can go back and read this document at your leisure. But we are, again, in future shows, we really will be going through this. So I want to jump to page 6, which gives us a bit more of a summary in terms of what they're actually looking to do. And this bit I will read through with you and give our reactions. And Graham, please feel free to chime in as and when you need to. As it says, to improve UAS product safety and security, because apparently that needs improving. Sorry, I'm giving my feedback too quickly, aren't I?
Tidy the cynicism away.
Am I starting too soon? Okay, I've been Mr. Positive so far this evening, because they're not screwing with sub 250 too much. So yes. So we propose to implement product standards from the 1st of January 2026 through a system of class marking. Isn't that a great idea? Aligning to international regulations where it is in the UK's interests. To maintain the security of our airspace, we are proposing for UAS to communicate location and identification data during flight, remote ID. There is key information on that. So wait a moment, because don't react initially, because there is key information very much along the lines of the video we put out with the interview clip from Mark Worry. There is good news, certainly in terms of what the CAA are proposing. Of course, you never know. These are CAA proposals to government. You never know what may happen in the future. The government may turn around and say, CAA, you're not dealing with drones anymore, and Ofcom's doing it now, and Ofcom do this instead. So this is still proposals. It's likely to form the basis of the proposals, of course, but just remember things can change as well. And of course, here it is, i.e. digital number plates for UAS. It's another reference to the digital number plates, but there we go. We're going to brush over that for a moment. We're also proposing to mandate functionality that prevent UAS entering restricted airspace without appropriate permissions. So Geo Awareness and Geo Fencing, we will touch on that in a little bit. Finally, we aim to support the UAS sector by allowing UAS operators in the open category until 2028 to adopt Class Mark UAS, and by introducing more flexibility in conformity assessment requirements for the UAS manufacturers. These proposals are summarized below, and this is the main little boxes here. So they want to simplify regulation, simplify operational requirements in the A1 and A3 subcategory, rename operational subcategories to over, near, and far. So rather than A1, A2, and A3, you will be flying over people, near people, or far from people. And they're going to remove exclusions for toy UAS from registration requirements. There is a little spoiler here. They are also talking about removing anything sub potentially 50 to 100 grams from these rules completely. So whoops could actually be, so the toy thing, they giveth with one hand, taketh with the other, I think is fair to say on that one, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's, I'm not sure. Is that a money grab, given that every drone sold to every 6-year-old at Christmas is?
Yeah, well, I don't think so. To be honest, I think it's more because, of course, those won't have the complex camera that requires registration, but it removes the Facebook social media debates about what a toy drone is, and also, of course, it removes it from debate in court. Is more what I think it's about personally, but that's for the deeper dive. So the next one, increasing education and understanding. That sounds like a good idea. So they're going to require sub 250 gram UAS pilots to take the online free flyer ID test. So that, of course, at the moment you have to have your operator ID. Now you're going to have your flyer ID as well. I don't personally object to that. How about yourself, Graham?
No, not at all. Absolutely not at all.
Half expecting it.
it's not hard. Three quarters expecting. It's not hard. It's free. It's,
Yeah.
what to me, it's a requirement to have the laws, because you have to have a law that says that people don't need to understand the law. Ignorance is no excuse. All the
Yeah, I
rest of
mean,
it. But God, it doesn't half help if you do have a basic grasp of the regulations,
yes.
and that way you're far less likely to get yourself into trouble. So
Yes, and
just makes
also, of
sense.
course, the more people that sign up to the Flyer AD test, the more people you can technically prosecute and hold accountable, because they've signed something digitally to say that they understand it and
They
they've passed an
understand.
exam
Yeah.
and that type of thing. So there is also a bit of holding people to account, I suppose, to an extent there. Digital safety information provided to flyers at product setup, and that's going to be interesting when we go into the deeper detail on that one.
Yeah.
Improve our policy and guidance documentation. We're going to say very little. Step away. Graham, step away from the microphone. We're going to say very little about that one until our deeper dive on that one, because there's a whole lot going on there. But it's the technical documentation stuff that perhaps some of our flyers out there, the people flying in the open category, etc., won't want to know about, or won't need to know about this evening, certainly when we're talking about the top end. Product safety and security. Implement UAS product safety and security standards. Introduce UK-specific product marking for class-marked UAS, enable implementation of a market surveillance authority. So C labels are coming back. They're coming back in almost in totality, with some little edits here and there, and in the long term will become UK1 rather than C1, etc., and that type of thing. So, but we'll come on to that. Safe and secure airspace. Thank goodness. We're being saved. We're being saved from all these. Implement hybrid remote ID for UAS greater than 250 grams and or with cameras.
So all the minis anyway.
All the minis anyway. And remember, we do not have the same differential within regulation in terms of recreational and commercial flying. So whereas in the United States, sub 250 recreational do not need to have remote ID, you will need to have it here in the UK. So your sub 250 gram mini, for whatever reason you're flying it, will have to comply with remote ID. Implement Geo Awareness and Geo Fencing, and require flashing lights for UAS operations in the dark. Now, the Geo Awareness and Geo Fencing, we are going to talk about it today, and that is actually also going to be a deep dive video all of itself, because there is a lot of questions there in terms of the technical ability, in terms of the enforcement and that type of thing, which indeed within this document, the CAA even themselves say, we're not entirely sure how we're going to enforce this. So I think that's something which we're going to have to have a separate video on, but we will talk about it. We will touch on it today because it is very important. And then supporting the UAS sector in terms of being more flexible in the conformity assessments, but also adopting an extended transition period, which as a heads up for that, essentially we're going to get an extra 2 years beyond the 2026 for legacy drones to have a little bit more use, although some of that doesn't really, because it's really focused, that legacy stuff, in my opinion, is more focused on the sub 250 side of things anyway. So, and then as it says, these proposals build upon the retained EU legislation for UAS in several places, including our proposals for operational requirements, geofencing and remote ID. These changes will simplify and strengthen regulations, enabling a world-leading, future-proofed regulatory environment for the UAS sector to grow. We welcome responses from the community by 2400 on the 10th of January 2024. Cool, you're being very restrained. A consultation reply document, including a summary of feedback and initial recommendations, will then be published, of course, next year, which will then be put forward to the government. So we then have the introduction. We then have a decent amount of conversation, a decent amount of explanation in terms of facts and figures. Again, on this document, we're seeing not all of them are actually present when they say that some later in the document actually say they need adding, but there is more links and things to actually show what they are thinking about here. It's, you see the bottom one there, Christmas drone chaos cost Gatwick just £1.4 million Telegraph, which is it might not be in there for the reason you think, but we will be going through these pages, as I say, in the deeper dive. I want to keep this in terms of the headline facts of what we know, so that it doesn't become too heavy in terms of regulation. And if you want to join us for the deeper dive, you'll be more than welcome to do that as well, of course. So the next part I want to talk about is the strategic objectives. So they have these 5 strategic objectives that they're looking to achieve. The first one is simplifying regulation, which is UAS operators and remote pilots need to be confident that they're flying. So they want you to be able to understand it better. So no more A1, A2, A3. It's going to be flying over, near, or far from people, etc. They're going to keep the understanding of where you can and can't fly easier to digest. Basically, the idea is that you're going to be able to pick up a drone and go out flying with it and understand the regulations without having to have a degree or watch 50 Geeksvana YouTube videos, basically, which I also support. I would love people to watch one video and understand everything. Wouldn't that be good, Graham?
Be great. Be great. The I'm not 100% convinced that just changing the names of things simplifies. And
no, and that isn't the only thing they're doing as well, of course. But you know, if they achieve that goal through things like that and other things, then you know, I'm supportive of it in general terms.
Well,
I suppose where we sit, I sort of sit ready to be proven, then proven correct. Whereas obviously, yes, from your side of things with a specific category, you've already been hit by the baseball bat several times. So actually, you're kind of still on the ground, spitting up a few teeth at the moment.
I'm like a fresh club seal, mate.
Yeah. That's it, exactly. The second point, the second part of their strategic objectives is increasing education and understanding. I fully support anything that does that. I'm not sure if just adding flyer IDs and things necessarily does that, but anyway, we can debate that in the deeper dives. Product safety and security, safe and secure airspace, and supporting UAS sector. So very much along the lines of the strategic points that we saw above. So the next part that I want to talk about is along here, which is, excuse me, my document page has actually just gone a little bit wrong. Bear with me, people. So on page 11, there was actually the first views here is obviously in terms of the simplifying regulation. And again, they go into a lot of discussion around how and why they want to do that, and the fact that they feel like open, specific, certified, and then subcategories of open A1, A2, A3 is a little bit complex. Now, it's interesting that overall 33% of responses were positive in terms of changing it and 59% were negative, but they've taken that on board, but they actually agree with the stakeholders who submitted the framework that it needs to be changed. And these are the next little subcategories, which I will read out because these are some very, very important changes. Currently, all flights in the A1 subcategory cannot take place over groups of uninvolved people, but sub 250 and C0s can fly over uninvolved individuals. C1 UAS must reduce as much as possible flights over persons, etc. So their view is that this is too complex. Now, there was obviously fears that perhaps it would go the other way, but they're actually proposing to allow C1 UAS, so like the Air One, which is currently very tiny in the corner of my screen that sat behind me here, to overfly uninvolved people whilst maintaining the requirement not to overfly groups of uninvolved people. It'll be interesting to see if they further clarify or change the definition of groups. It'll be interesting to see from that point of view. This would, in effect, harmonise requirements for flying over uninvolved persons in the A1 subcategory for different types of UAS. Over the coming months, we will assess the safety implications of this approach. So what they're basically proposing there is that anything up to C1 will get the same benefits that sub 250 grams do at the moment. So anybody that's got the Mavic 3 Classic out there sat in the box, if you've still got it in 2026, or if this comes in sooner, who knows? But yeah, if the battery's still working by then, it hasn't been bricked by a DJI update or something, then yeah. But to me, you know, I think we knew C-class labels would have to come back at some point. I think we knew that they would, again, I think it's one of the things that I'm overall pretty positive about, but also something that I probably expected would happen. There is some nuances to that which we will come back to, but that is very much the headline that we want to leave you with that on that. At present, the regulation only explicitly allows okay, I'm not actually going to go into point 2 because it's a technical point, and when you read it, it sounds like it's actually saying the opposite. So I'm going to move on to point 3. Point 2 will be in the deeper dive. The current operational requirements for flights in the A3 subcategory do not specifically define a minimum distance. Did you know that, Graham, that at the moment in the A3 category, there is no legislation in place to say how far you have to be from people?
So you could almost think that the drone code is misleading in that respect, Sean.
Well, the drone code is advice. And more and more, you know, when I started in the hobby and the drone code, I was like, oh, it's the drone code. You can't do that. The drone code says. And now I'm kind of like, well, the drone code says it, so I can now ask 10 questions and find out what the actual response is, type thing, you know, what the actual reason is. Of course, you know, part of that is the fact that a lot of this has to be tested in court and that kind of thing as well. So but at the moment there is no distance. However, the guidance material sets out that a minimum distance of 50 meters should be maintained from uninvolved people. They are proposing to introduce a regulatory requirement that the A3 subcategory will have a minimum of 50 meters from uninvolved people. This aims to avoid confusion for users by aligning regulation with current guidance. It's worth pointing out that this is not impacting Article 16, as far as we are aware. And Article 16 does come up in this document when they start talking about model aircraft.
I wonder which incidents this is based on.
Oh, but bringing that in, it's to avoid confusion, Graham. What are you saying?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you could avoid confusion by just telling people what the law is. You could.
Point 4. At present, the operational requirements for flights in the A3 subcategory limit distances. Now, this is distances to residential, commercial, industrial, or recreational areas to 150. The CAA interpretation of this requirement, published within guidance material, sets that out to include individual buildings. If you remember in the AMC GM, the general guidance material, it does actually say one building is essentially a village, is essentially, you know, coming close to residential, industrial, etc. Now, the difference between the guidance material and the regulatory requirements may create confusion for operators. They are proposing to change the regulatory requirement for flights in the A3 subcategory to be at least 150 meters away from residential commercial buildings, but it's going to be that one building, basically. Flights taking place closer than 150 meters to individual buildings will continue to be subject to A1 or A2 subcategory requirements. So essentially, what they're really saying is that as far as separations are concerned, they want to make the drone code regulation / legislation. They want to make that something that you have to follow, not something that's guidance and then, you know, you're sort of in and out from that point of view.
Yeah. I'm just thinking back that farm we flew at, and we didn't pace out how far we were from those farm buildings, but I'd hate to think that we would have to.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And again, some of this you have to remember comes up in terms of what actually happens in terms of enforcement and that type of thing, etc. And you know, a lot of these things aren't actually, you know, about necessarily that issue. Right, my camera is just frozen. Apparently, let me just sort that very, very quickly. At least the camera's only very small on the bottom corner, so I'm not taking a bit. That will refresh in a couple of moments, but I'll carry on speaking, as you can see, Graham, and the documentation whilst we wait for the camera to wake itself back up.
Shall I move my lips and we can pretend it's you talking?
No, let's not do that. That'll be rather scary for the audience. Bear with me just one second. I'm just going to try. Oh, there we go. Just going to try something else, but I've done it. So right, hopefully that won't happen too many times this evening. Apologies. So yes. So that's that particular point. And, you know, to me, I think it's, you know, again, they start to raise their questions here in terms of whether or not you agree with things. And that's very much how the consultation response form works. It will be asking you in these set questions what your opinions are. Now, I have to say, from a public consultation point of view, just this part of it, as it were, Graham, and no, Elsmeged, Graham is not in the jungle on I'm a Celeb. He just loves his shirts. And yeah, so basically,
and kangaroo testicles, it's got to be said.
yeah. Did we ever think we'd say kangaroo testicles on one of ours? But there we go. But yes, and it's at least the questions are actually specific and they're definitive, if that makes sense. They're not sort of
And they
10 questions in one. You know, it's
yeah, and they are relating to the words that are above rather
exactly
than
exactly
almost random.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, up next, another key change which we talked about in the highlight parts earlier, and this is operational category names. So the call for input set out the fact that they felt like the category names were too complex, as I've said before. The responses were mixed. 45.6 were positive, 44.1 were negative. Some responses are they okay? Mid rolls apparently are happening. This is something I will stop the show for just a moment and go across and see if I can fix that live, because that should not be happening, Mr. YouTube. Edit settings. Okay, I've just pressed a button that delays ads for, it's saying 15 minutes. So nobody should get any adverts for the next 15 minutes. Although we have turned the ads down to the least possible. It shouldn't actually technically do any mid-rolls on that, but we're still having problems with it, but we'll get there. But please please keep me informed in the chat if that keeps happening, because it's annoying for me as well, frankly, because it isn't what I want to happen. If I wanted it to happen, I'd be fine with it, you know. But
yeah, we'd be pausing, wouldn't we?
The pennies you get for a mid-roll during a live stream, you know, it's so frustrating that it has to happen, frankly, and annoy people. So, and a couple of people saying they've had no ads so far, which is good. So yes, so they had obviously had a mixed response. And now many stakeholders, there's that lovely word stakeholders, specifically recommended changing the subcategories to over, near, and far. What's your initial guts? Because they're saying here we're proposing to change the names of UAS subcategories from A1, A2, and A3 to over, near, and far. I don't want to get bogged down on this because I want to get through a lot of the material tonight. But yeah, to me, I see the positives and negatives of this. Because yes, you're telling someone they can fly over them, they can fly near them, or they need to stay far away. So I can understand that. Do you see any negative there?
I don't see any negative. What I do see is that it's something that's already there. I mean, when this was first introduced, my understanding was, and I'm pretty sure it's in the code, is that it is that A1 is over people, A2 is near to people or close to people,
yeah,
and A3 is far from people.
The thing is, so though,
they've just taken the words.
It is, however, you're coming at this as well from an experienced operator point of view.
I am,
and the only thing I would say from that point of view is that you do have a situation here where people are, you know, who are new to this, who don't have much experience, that type of thing. I think it could be quite a big benefit for those people, basically, if that makes sense.
It could be. It could have an unintended consequence. Just looking at it and coming fresh to this.
It could, as so much, of course, could have unintended consequences, as we've seen so many times over the years. But yes,
far from people means you fly far from people.
Yes.
Flying far means beyond visual line of sight.
Yeah. There is, but the only benefit I would say, and apologies for the camera again, everybody, but the only benefit of it is that it's the minutiae of it, basically, if that makes sense. So from the point of view of it actually being going across to the occasional user who picks this up and gets a leaflet when they buy their drone, etc., that's where I think it has that
it's the words they put next to over, near, and far that will matter.
Yes, and how exactly
right.
The context of how it actually works from that point of view will be very, very important. Thank you, Drone Dad, for who is one of our members, a Drone Geek member for 14 months. I really appreciate all of our members and how much they support. See so many of you in the chat this evening. And very quickly, while I'm just stopping for that, Mindlab Matt, thank you for the £2 super chat. We will come back and talk about that particular topic very, very soon. And one of my little documents has vanished on me there. There we go. So yes, and the next part, which is operational exclusions. Now, this is an important part to talk about as well. At present, some UAS, such as toys or UAS sub 250, benefit from exclusions from some operational requirements, including registration, remote pilot competency, the things that we already know. Feedback was that 54% were positive, and they're putting it as moderately supportive, which with those percentages we can see on screen, I would probably support that it is moderately. So they are basically saying down here on 2.13, they're proposing to remove the exclusions from registration and remote pilot competency requirements for toy UAS operations, instead relying wholly on weight or class mark to determine the scope of requirements. So they're not saying all toys have to be included. They're just saying they're not going to use the word and therefore that whole classification side of things. This change will result in operators of sub 250 camera drones needing an operator ID, irrespective of whether it is a toy or not, as is the case today. Without cameras, obviously will not require an operator ID. Proposals relating to flyer ID are obviously discussed in chapter 3, as we are moving on to next. Now, it is worth noting that they are, again, it is later in the document, but they are talking about having a drop in terms of 50 to 100 grams. They're asking for feedback on where the level is, in terms of not actually having any restriction on those, essentially making those exempt again. So page 15, this one I wanted to talk about, and this is again where they're talking about flyer education. So this is obviously flyer IDs and that type of thing. And again, they talk about the stats here and the people supporting, not supporting, and actually that there are 21% of drone users, only 21% had awareness of the 400-foot height restriction without being prompted. I'm surprised by that. I think that percentage is probably from their tracking focus group, which of course is a very small number of people. But I think it's one of the first things that a lot of people learn, isn't it, really? That's 120 meters is the highest you can go to.
Yeah, I mean, that one is probably the most common and easiest to understand, because visual line of sight it's woolly, as we know, and 500 meters comes up and people will argue against it. The only complication on 500 feet is where it's from.
Yes.
Sorry, 400 feet is where that's taken from.
Exactly,
but,
exactly.
400 foot is a number that most people will know.
Yes. Yeah, and so I think that's one of the difficult ones where you see a change from the focus group figures and extrapolating that across to a wider base, because I don't think it personally, I don't necessarily think it stacks. But the main highlight
and the nice thing is that's without being prompted. So presumably a lot higher might if they were prompted, which if they're flying DJI or most drones, they will be prompted when they get to 120 meters or 400 foot to say, are you allowed to do this?
Yeah, depending on what software they're running and all the other stuff. So 3.6 here says we're proposing to extend the requirement for a remote pilot to take the flyer ID test for UAS operations in the open category to include when flying a UAS less than 250 without a camera, as described in chapter 2. We also propose to remove exclusions for toys. However, they also stating here that we recognize that miniature UAS, i.e. less than 100 grams without a cameras, pose a negligible safety and security risk, and previously would have been considered toys in most cases. We welcome views on whether we should introduce a minimum weight threshold in the region of 50 to 100 grams to exclude miniature UAS. Now, FPV flyers in the chat, Whoop fans, I have Whoops around, etc. Is 100 grams enough? Is 100 grams where you've only got the FPV feed, so perhaps you've got a DVR recording or something, but you don't have a complex camera on that little drone, of course, because it's tiny. Is that enough to keep the Whoop side of things alive and outside of main regulation? Do let me know what you all think in terms of that, especially the replay guys as well watching this. Now, there are 280 people watching the stream at the moment, 74 likes. I'd love to see that over 100 likes before the end of the show, if you don't mind. I would really, it would make my day. It means it helps on the algorithm, but it just helps my little ego and it boosts my morale, shall we say, when I come off the show and we have more than 100 likes. It's always nice, isn't it?
He's very fragile.
Oh, I'm very fragile. Yes, indeed. I sit in the corner psyching myself up for a live show all day, and I won't come out of my bedroom at all. But there we go. So the next part on page 16, which within a few pages we're getting quite a lot covered here, is the product guidance. And of course, again, here it's talking about what happened in the CFI, what we've got in place at the moment, and that kind of thing, which is obviously all very well and good. But then we come on to the really chunky bit here, which is where we are proposing to require C0, C1, C2, and C3 UAS to display important regulatory information via a digital notice on the user interface or controller app during the product setup. So is this essentially going back to the side of things where we are looking at because the DJI used to have a little boot up screen, didn't it? It used to have a little thing where it would give you a quiz, and that time and you could skip it a few times, then you'd have to take it. So I assume we're sort of looking from that point of view. It says here, however, we also agree with the call for input respondents who argued that more frequent displays of this information would inconvenience experienced flyers. And that's one of the things I think they need to really find their level on, in terms of who this stuff is aimed at. You don't need to show me or you or most of the people watching right now what the basic rules are every time they turn their drone on. That doesn't need to happen. The people we need to hit are the guys like in the States who was flying his little drone in a TFR near an F1 race, etc., with crowds and cars and all the other stuff. Those are the kind of people, the people the chap that flew his drone near the Spitfire, etc. Those are the people that need these things reminded. They already knew what they're doing, more than likely, perhaps, but certainly we would help more people follow the basic rules and have less headlines for the beginners. And that's where I think a lot of this stuff needs to start having some kind of separation of aiming it, because if you aim it specifically at the right audience as well, it was a hurricane, thank you, Vince, then actually also you can really focus the message in as well, can't you, basically?
I mean, one of the problems with during product setup is that when you're setting a product up, you are probably taking up an awful lot of bandwidth. You are, you might be doing firmware updates, charging batteries, running around looking for charges, that sort of thing. We've all been there, and it's not a time where you'll calmly sit down and read the notice. I suspect people just flick straight through. And you can say that they've been told and it's there, and it's another opportunity to tell people. So, it's not a bad thing, but I'm not sure it will do an awful lot. And you've also got to get all the manufacturers to get the correct information on there.
Yes, exactly. Do ignore if my camera flickers a little bit, people. It's just, thankfully, it's only on this little page that's doing it. But yes, exactly. And I think this is one of this and Geo Awareness and Geo Fencing is possibly the issue, one of the issues that I see from this.
They've got to crack, I think.
Yeah, because how do they show that differential? Does that make sense? It's like how do they keep that differential going from the point of view of and also how do they prove the technical capabilities of making those things work? Especially when people use third-party apps and that type of thing. So, if you use Litchi, does it now have to do that? And you can't use Litchi unless you do it. It's interesting, isn't it? It's something which I think is. And
at what point does the manufacturer take liability if they've got the information incorrect on their app?
Yes.
And haven't done an update.
No, exactly. Now, I want to touch base on the policy and guidance documentation a little bit here as well, because this is something which I think is pretty important. And as my camera comes back on, hello everybody. The overview here is that they feel like the documentation is too heavy. I think we'd agree with that. But what they're going to do is perhaps, again, we need to wait and see the context of all of this. And I don't know whether I can answer these questions with the amount of information they're giving me here. So this might be one of the things we require a lot more information, either through interview or email questions, etc., with the CAA. But essentially, they're talking about removing the 722 documentation setup series over time, and they will absorb the relevant information into the AMC GM, which I know that when we spoke to Mark, it was in our one of the clips that we played out for him in one of our live shows last month, where he actually mentioned the fact that the AMC GM is going to become much more important, didn't he, basically, and it's going to become the lead document. Now, I think it's a very brave thing to get rid of documentation which has been in place for a very long time and has been developed over a very long time. I don't know. I need to think long and hard about this and find out a lot more information in terms of whether I would support something like 722 series being phased out, essentially. What do you think?
I agree. If if the AMC remains in the same guise it is now, then it's a horrible document, and it is a difficult document. It's 722 is pretty straightforward, and we've all got used to it, as you say, and we know where it is, and it's
Can I just
722.
test by Ian? This is horse manure. No way am I sticking a remote ID module on a 75-gram modular 8. These people need to stop trying. I don't think you're listening, because they're talking about sub 100 gramish being exempt completely. So your modular 8, unless it's suddenly carrying a complex camera like a Mini 2 or something, won't actually, if all of these proposals go through in the way that they're suggesting and they stick to the 100 grams that they're talking about, that would very much be that they are agreeing with that point, basically. And so I don't mind calling out the points, but we need to try and understand exactly what's being said where we can as well. I think that's important, isn't it? So
yeah.
Okay, so C labels, as I'm calling it, and class marking and product standards, as the CAA would like to call it. And this again gives us an overview of where we are, which, as we know, there's currently technically laws in place in terms of using the EU class marking, but we would need all of the, we know all of the situation of what happened there. So basically what they are now talking about is proposing, and it's here on point 4.3, we're proposing to implement class marking and product standards from the 1st of January 2026 for UAS intended to be used in the open category. In effect, manufacturers and other economic operators placing UAS on the market will need to meet class marking requirements from this point. We recognise the benefits of international alignment. However, we also consider there to be areas where divergence is in the UK's interests. We're proposing to align EU regulations for class marking and product standards unless there is a safety, security or user benefit that requires divergence. 3 and 5, chapter 3 and 5 obviously describe specific proposals that diverge from EU regulations regarding remote ID, etc. Now, they're talking here about update requirements for tethered UAS. I will come back to that in our specific category breakdown of this. I think Graham would agree with that, but also our deeper dive. Point 2 here, requiring C0 and C4 UAS to have unique serial numbers and to enable the CAA and other bodies to identify and manage conformity of these UAS, and removing the requirements for C5 and C6 UAS intended for use in the specific category. So they're all sort of tops and tails, as it were, basically.
Yeah.
And the product labeling and identification side of things, I think this is obviously an important one. And we jump down to point 4.9, which is above here, is obviously the explainers. We are proposing to replace EU class identification label with a UK specific identification label. We expect that replacing the letter C with UK provides the simplest solution, i.e. replacing C1 with UK1. We believe this proposal is necessary to ensure class identifications can be used to demonstrate compliance within regulations under the UK and or EU jurisdictions. And they raise the question there of, do you agree or disagree with the proposal to have a UK specific class? That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because
it is.
There is later on, they talk about the fact that you can use the C ones, the C labels anyway for a period of time. So there'll be a bit of a crossover. But again, I need to be convinced as to why we need a UK specific one. I know we need our own regulatory or rather our own market oversight, etc., and we need these assessment bodies in place. And of course, it would avoid confusion to say it's a UK one, but I suppose it's just another sticker, isn't it? Really, it's just another sticker that's going to go on a DJI drone.
It's another sticker. I think the interesting bit is 4.4, going back to 4.4, the bit after the comma in the bold text, which is where there might be a safety, security or user benefit that requires divergence, and how that divergence is managed, and what happens to all the people with a pre-divergence drone compared with a post-divergence drone, given that they might both be marked with a UK or C marking.
Yeah, again, there is a lot of context missing, isn't there, in terms of how some of this would work in practice.
How it's going to be managed.
Of course, the majority of consumers will see this from the point of view that it's literally something which is going to be, if it has a UK one or a C1 label, you're going to be able to use it for the time being. This is obviously post 2026, should all of this come in, basically. And then it talks about market surveillance, etc., which we're going to come on to at a future point. Now, the next part I want to talk about is remote ID, which is page 22 for anybody that's reading along. This basically, one of the points I want to jump to first is actually on page 24, because this is one of the parts that we talked about in interview with the CAA with Mark Worry. And here it says data, privacy, security, and access. The call for input highlighted concerns from UAS users regarding the impact of remote ID on data privacy. Our approach to data privacy would be compliant with the Data Protection Act 2018 and therefore GDPR principles. More specifically, we will ensure that personally identifiable information such as operator ID is not made available to the general public and is protected by robust security controls. Also, now there's a nuance here under network remote ID, and that's an important individual point to make. Network remote ID, service providers would not display the pilot or ground control station's location. This would be viewable by authorized persons only, such as police. The pilot or ground control station location data will be visible to those able to receive and interpret direct remote ID data, as it is not technically possible to encrypt this data to only be viewable by certain user groups. The pilot's location will therefore only be available publicly if network remote ID is not enabled. So essentially, you're going to be able to use network remote ID, and obviously it will revert to localized remote ID. So essentially, it's going to be sending your details across the airwaves the entire time. If it can't do that, it's going to tell everybody where you are and that type of thing that is able to receive that data, whether it's an app or anything else like that. But the whole time it's under the network remote ID side of things, it's there. I mean, again, context, again, that the remote ID will become a deeper dive element. Of course, it will be a video all of itself on the channel coming soon in terms of how it's actually, this is actually impacted on it, basically. But unsurprisingly, I think we would hear, and in fact, I'm surprised it wasn't higher. 60.7% of responses to the call for input were negative. But again, actually 15.3 responses were positive. That probably tells more than the 60% actually, doesn't it? The positive views recognizing the benefits from identifying unlawful operators, which I think I do support in general, but it's interesting. Now, here is one of the first parts of this report where I think myself and Graham share a bit of an issue with, that it says here, data available to the CAA, government and police provides conclusive evidence of the severity and scale of safety and security risk posed by the misuse of UAS. Since November 2020, police have received 18,290 reports of drone flights involving a legal nuisance, criminal or safety concern. In the first 9 months of 2023, reports are 10% higher. It gives the reference point of 0.23, and below that shows that reference point as
found it yet.
It's to add, and that frustrates me slightly that a really, really important part of remote ID that is in this report, and they haven't added the link. I'm the source there. I'm slightly frustrated by that, shall we say? And we are chasing already. We've already chased on this, and we will get that information as soon as possible. Hopefully they will reproduce, because obviously it's only a link to a PDF. They can reproduce it and replace this PDF with an updated one, because I think that needs to be front and foremost, frankly, doesn't it?
Yeah, we need to know what basis the decisions have been made on.
Yeah, exactly. So then 5.8, we're proposing to implement remote ID through product and operational requirements. They talk about the technical approach. There is going to be a hybrid remote ID, i.e. network and direct, which they feel offers the optimal solution for the UK. Obviously, we're a lot smaller than the US, so we're going to be able to have network remote ID working in and it going across the airwaves in quite a lot of the area. Amok saying, what percentage of flights is 18,290? Clear Air Flying saying 18,200 Karens moaning is not a legitimate basis of legislation. Well, I don't disagree with that, do you? Because it reports, it to me just shows more people are aware that drones are around. Does that make sense?
And 18, I strongly suspect if it were 18,290 actual legal nuisance, criminal or safety concerns, if there were actual ones rather than concerns, then we'd see more people in court than we do. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah. It's a, you know, when
there
you're
are a lot of flights every year by drones, and as you say, as a
if
proportion, that
if
is
we were to
significant.
change parking regulations and or speeding regulations by the amount of people that call the police to complain about someone driving a car,
Yeah,
does that make sense? But
yeah,
we don't tend to do that, do we? We tend to do that by the actual issues that are happening and that type of thing.
yeah.
And you know, to me, it feels like, you know, Suffolk Air Adventures is saying the 10% increase in 2023 is possibly related to ever increasing sailor drones. I completely agree with that. I also think it's the public being more aware of drones as well, and the public being more aware that perhaps the drone may or may not shouldn't be, or they personally feel that there's no way that
Feel
drone
that
can
it
fly
shouldn't be
over
there.
my garden
You
legally.
could, I mean, you might be able to half those numbers by doing better education from the regulator or the police to people who are reporting concerns.
Yes,
And hey, you'd half the number without having to introduce network of remote ID.
exactly. So the next part we're going to move on to, and again, all of these topics are going to be coming in from the point of view of deeper dives on all of these topics. So you'll be able to come back and pick and choose the videos you want to watch, pick and choose the bits that affect you and where you're flying. We're trying to give the very much the broad strokes, the first look, as it were, into this consultation and the proposals. Geo awareness and geofencing. Essentially, what you need to know from this section is that it's a bit of a mess, in my opinion. Really, the only part that I think
Yeah.
that we can clarify right now is 5.14, where the first sentence in bold, that they're proposing to implement geo awareness and geofencing for UAS. Now, how they do that and how they get
It's another matter.
accurate geofencing, because we've already got all of the, and in fact, their own safety notice recently of saying don't follow DJI's geofencing, etc. So there is such a huge question there, and this is going to be a very big video all of its own in terms of the technical requirements for this to work. They themselves talk about the fact that when they at the bottom here, enforcement of it, which of course is very important, we are continuing to consider how these requirements could be enforced effectively. So they've got the
If they can't be
idea,
enforced,
but they
don't implement.
they don't know actually how to implement it or necessarily how that's going to be enforced. And of course, enforcement is the part that affects so many of us, basically. And
Sure. On this one, I'm going to hark back because I am able to get it into every conversation. Cap 722H refers to geo awareness and has a completely different definition to it than the one that's in the legislation and in this document.
yes,
So,
but again, I think that will obviously change should this change. You know, the whole thing will be brought into it. The problem is, I completely agree with what you're saying, though, 110%. And the problem is that if we don't know even how it could be effectively enforced right now, how do we know that doing it is going to have the desired effect, basically? And that how on earth are we going to get DJI to put specific software updates that launch another piece of background software on just the drones coming into the UK?
and if we are concerned about, and we know there are security concerns around Chinese manufacturers, assuming they're not going to close off the availability of those drones, they're then going to trust those manufacturers not to let us fly into restricted areas, when actually, if they wanted to cause a bit of disruption, they could perhaps just switch that off and let people fly into restricted areas. It's
yeah. I mean, because then also, exactly, because then also in enforcement terms, somebody buys a secondhand Mini 3, doesn't update it, just goes out and flies, but then finds out the person before has drone hacks on it or something, and actually there is no software on there. But as far as they're aware, having read the updated drone code, etc., the drone should, because it's got that class marking on it,
tell it when to do an update.
And also tell it when to fly and that type of thing. So it's an interesting one, isn't it? So
the devil is in the detail.
indeed,
on this stuff.
indeed. Flashing light, there's going to be a requirement for the flashing light. There's already a flashing light
Okay.
that happens on most drones, although of course some stops when you hit the record button, but there will be a flashing light basically. But however they code it, that flashing light, as Clear Air Flying is saying, I've just spotted it in the chat there, in terms of it does turn off on a lot of the DJI drones now. That won't happen. It will stay on basically to give you more VLOS basically, and to be able to see the drone in the sky better. So yes, so supporting the UAS sector, there is going to be different types of transition periods. So transition periods where you can still use the C class before the UK 1 comes in. There's still going to be things of legacy drones in terms of when and where they can be used. They've given a very handy little chart here. As you can see, from January 2028 onwards, the only legacy drones that will survive are sub 250 gram drones that have active remote ID running on them. So whether that's via a software update or a module, which might actually then no longer make them sub 250, but that's an argument for another time. But the transition period before that, so 2026 to 2028, there's obviously here are effectively when you're going to be able to use them. Again, I'm going to do a C labels video, and I'll talk more specifically about this, because I feel like talking about legacy drones in 2027 and 2026, when we don't even have the new C label system yet, is a little bit far down the line. And
it is a bit, isn't it?
The legacy drones will be flying in 2026, 2027. Haven't, what's that joke about that they're not even in their father's
but yeah, not glint in the father's. Yeah. I mean, this bit does seem somewhat bizarre, doesn't it? And in terms of simplification, doesn't seem like simplification.
Yeah, indeed.
We just got our heads around the other stuff, guys.
Yes. So it's also worth pointing out that there is specific things here for model aircraft. I'm going to be doing a specific model aircraft one. We're going to be having essentially freers here in the UK as well, but you won't have to apply for a freer. As long as it's a model aircraft and you stay within the boundaries of that model aircraft, flying field, etc., you're going to be able to escape remote ID and that side of things. And then you get the rest of the document from here on is that until 2400 again, on the 10th of January 2024. What's 2400? Does that bug you?
Yes, it really does. Okay. It really does. Yeah.
So much of this consultation has been so much better than previous consultations, and I congratulate them for that. But little things like that, and the links being missing and that type of thing, and you just think, okay, come on, attention to detail, people. Come on, let's get this right. Also, what's handy?
It is via Citizen Space, and I wonder if Citizen watches show 2400. Just a question. Sorry.
Yeah,
carry.
Be interesting. So again, the summary of the consultation questions here, and so when you go through to the link on the website, you'll be asked to answer these 30 odd questions. Again, it seems like a lot of questions. This is a major consultation, so it does take a bit of time to be able to answer, but at least the questions relate to what they're actually asking this time. So I'm happier to have more in the fact that we can actually get to answer each one specifically. And I'm sure there will be some people will say non-applicable or no comment, or, and they'll move on and get to the bits that's important for their flying. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. So that is the breakdown. That is the breakdown of what's actually coming. I just want to spend a few minutes coming onto the chat and seeing what people are saying, and maybe even answering a few questions. So if you've got any questions, do tag @Geeksvana in the chat and we'll come back to you. Thank you very much for the 240 people that are still watching. I know this is fairly heavy going type of stuff, but it is important. And thank you for the fact that we've blasted past 100 likes to 138 likes. That's made my evening. I really do appreciate it. And yes, people commenting the fact that I've frozen back there at the beginning. I apologize for that. I'm not sure what's happened there with the camera. We have all sorts of backups and everything else, but it still seems to have happened today. But there we go. Angus Cooper is saying that he thinks a more common sense approach should be adopted. For example, any legacy drone or new under 1 kilogram can do XYZ over and near people, and the sub 250 gram rule should stay the same. I think that's an interesting one, because when we started this conversation and the whole debate of legacy drones, thank you for your comment, Angus, started, we did have drones that were very different to what we have now. So, things like the DJI Air 3 here behind me, that's a very different drone. DJI have already started designing things for the EU market and for what was going to be our own sea label market, etc. So does that make sense? The Air 3 is very different to the Mavic 2 Pro, in safety terms and everything else like that. So actually, I do think the whole thing of legacy starts to become more of an interesting topic in terms of what should be included and what shouldn't, because actually drones are becoming even safer and lighter and that type of thing, and reliable, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's an interesting thing. And there's Elsmekhead saying there, remember people, this is a consultation. If you disagree, tell them. And I 100% agree with that. Thank you for mentioning that, Andy.
Sorry to jump in. We've got a couple of comments from our old friend Chris Lawrence, who we know and love, about the actual increase in incursions and air incursions near airports, and he sees that there really is a growing and measurable problem there.
And that is the absolute feedback we get as well. That there is it's actually that the airports themselves have become better, and people like Chris Lawrence, thank you, Chris, for your hard work, have become better at dealing with the incursions and traffic lighting them, etc. We had a very fascinating chat with Chris. There's a live stream previously on the channel which discusses it, where we talked at great length with Chris about this particular issue, and he talked about a traffic light system in terms of whether or not they're going to stop flights and where that drone is and that type of thing, which is interesting. GMI Visuals, Jason, good to see you. I hope you're well, sir. Whoops have cameras, so won't escape this. I believe, and this is one of the things I will check, because otherwise there's literally no point in them putting this if they literally mean line of sight sub 100. But it's the complex camera side of things. So it's something like, a 4K camera similar to a Mini 2 or that type of thing, not a DVR camera, even though you can record the DVR camera back at source and that type of thing. There will be specifics relating to that, basically. So
think dangly gimbally things.
Yes, exactly.
Be technical.
Exactly. Amok Time Flies, good to see you. Hope you're well. One of our channel members. 100% agree with the requirement for basically everyone to take the flyer ID test, as do I.
Yeah.
But it has to be Danny. It has to be in Danny at Argos's face when he buys his toy. And they are talking about that. They're talking about having something have to pop up a few times. They're saying they realize it shouldn't be too many times for the experienced flyers, but they are talking about having exactly that pop up when you actually do that. So. Rhubarb, good to see you. Thank you for your comment. Police going around with a set of drug dealer scales checking if you're underweight. What they'll essentially do is they'll look for the labels, they'll look for the product number. We've already seen that in some of the audit videos, etc., where police ask what type of drone, they look at what the drone is, they see if it has a C label, that type of thing. So I suppose we could start having the sort of underground eBay business of labels to tell someone the drone is something else, because then how does the police officer know what a Mini 2 is over a Mini 3? And
But the reality is, if something has gone wrong, that drone will get weighed, and that drone will get weighed on some accurate scales. It'll be taken off you and weighed. So
yeah, potentially. But again, when you look at enforcement, you look at enforcement in terms of the seriousness. What could a sub 250 gram or a drone that's just over it, what harm could it possibly cause to justify the spend in enforcement terms of getting that drone specifically weighed and all that? You'd have to be perhaps flying right next to a hurricane or something and that type of thing, maybe, to add charges. But again, I'm not entirely sure from that point of view. Lindsay Hayes, one of our regulars. Hi, Lindsay. Good to see you. Remote ID is surely overreach. Road vehicles and kitchen knives have been the main weapons in recent terrorism, but our ID is not broadcast by our cars when we turn the key nor pick up a knife. Yeah, I mean, there is a crossing of the roads here of aviation and drones, basically, because I think some use of drones can't really and shouldn't really be classed as aviation. And I know that's controversial in itself to say, but I think that that is really the two worlds joining, and there is a lot of fear around drones and the use of drones, and the recent things with Ukraine and even the stuff coming across from the Middle East at the moment. There is a lot of fear around the use of drones. Not necessarily justified here in the UK at the moment, but it feeds into it. And you have to remember that people making these decisions are general government politicians, etc., not even the CAA. So, those people are hearing these and seeing these things, and they're reacting to it, in my opinion.
And they're not, and to be honest, they're not seeing a lot of votes lost by introducing it. So
yeah, no, exactly.
That's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah, no, indeed, 100%. And reality is key, as it were. So yes, yes, and Amok Typho is saying another sticker, extra cost for the consumer. Yeah, and that's an issue as well, from the point of view that we don't make things so complicated that the manufacturer has to start putting the price of the drone up significantly to have all these extra pieces of software. I just the implementation, that's where I need to be sold on so many of these things, of how the idea in theory is great. I could come up with some ideas that in theory are great, but actually getting a manufacturer to do that, and some manufacturers to say, actually, I'm just not going to sell my drones in that country. It's difficult. There's a line that we're going to have to tread, and I think we need to see what we're doing, basically, from that point of view. So there we have it. That basically is it for this evening. I don't want to go on too long. I don't want these streams to be 3 hours long, so anybody that's coming in can actually pick apart the main parts of what we're talking about here. Still 255 people watching, which is fantastic. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. There is, as I say, we're going to have a few more videos coming up over the next few days, and then very, very soon I will be putting my responses on paper as well, and anybody that wants to come along and go through those 30 odd questions with me on what will be a fascinating live stream. Don't you think, Graham? Are you going to put it on in the background when you need to sleep?
I think so. Yeah,
Sean filling out the public consultation.
I think that could sell much better as a cure for insomnia than as a useful
but I'm happy for the people.
Useful, but
for the few people it will help. I'm happy. We will ensure that after that live is finished, we will put chapters up so people can jump to the questions which are important for them, of course. So we'll make sure there's a chapter timer running whilst I'm recording.
And you've got to do it anyway, so you may as well turn on the camera.
I suppose, exactly. And just very quickly, Norello, thank you very much for the £5 super chat. I really appreciate it. Evening both. Magnus here. Hi, Magnus. Can we not implement a system where you must present a license to the retailer before purchasing an SUA? You could, although you do still have the second-hand marketplace, you have the enforcement of that, you have the issue that the cost of that and who pays for that, etc., that type of thing. So yes, again, I think that's a very good idea, and thank you for your first super chat, as the chat is telling us. I think that's a very good idea, but I'm not sure how that would work in theory. Interestingly, actually, could anybody let me know in the live chat as well, and also the comments, how the mid-rolls have been going? Because I've noticed since I've pressed the ads to stop, it froze at 2 seconds. So I'm not sure whether it's actually bothered putting any more ads on there, which would be fantastic if nobody else has had any. But yes, as Elsemaker is saying, hit the like button on your way out. I really would appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us. I really do appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. And I look forward to taking this apart and getting some of the answers that we need so we can understand this before we all put our answers in. Yes, it'll be a fun one, won't it, Graham? It's going to be a fun few days.
It will, yeah. I love 42 pages to go through. It's
not that long, and so far out of 10, I would give this consultation a solid 6 in terms of not necessarily agreeing with what it's saying, but in terms of
structure and
ease of access, and
it beats the hell out of the AMC GM one that came out, and in terms of the absolute nonsense of the call for information, it is it's streets.
We're not having to call straight away for an email address to be able to put your stuff in, so that you can actually put normal paragraphs forward. But by the way, there is also a report out to show the responses from CFI, so there will be a video for that. So guess what, there's going to be a lot of videos on this over the coming couple of weeks on Geeksvana, so you're going to get to see our lovely faces an awful lot on the live shows. Excellent. That has to be the longest good night I've ever done. Thanks, everybody. Sean out.
Thanks. Bye.